just west of that tall Acropolis in Athens, there's this rocky hill, and it overlooks the ancient agora. The Athenians once used it as a meeting place for their supreme court. Legend even says that Ares, the god of war, was put on trial there for murdering a son of Poseidon. And so it's called the Areopagus, or Mars Hill, the Romans would say. Now, some scholars doubt whether that court actually met in that location in the first century, in the Roman era. They might have kept the name Areopagus, but met somewhere else in a different building. And it's also not clear exactly what's going on here, if Paul was being forced to stand before some kind of tribunal, some formal case, or if they're just inviting him to share his ideas with members of the court. If that was the situation, then maybe it did take place right there on that big rock overlooking the agora. Now, as he begins to speak, Paul makes full use of that opportunity and even draws upon other things that he's noticed in the culture. That's what I'm talking about when I mention cultural opportunities. Let's take a look at Acts 17, verses 22 and 23. It says, "So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, 'Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you.'" So Paul's seizing several opportunities here. First, scholars tell us that even as he speaks, he's following the customs of Greek oratory. That address, "Men of Athens," is the same thing that Demosthenes would have said 400 years earlier. And those kinds of formal speeches, they would often begin with a sort of introduction like this. And even the way Paul notes their religiosity and this altar to an unknown God. Now, archaeologists have never discovered an altar with that inscription in Athens, but they have found those in other locations. And so it gives you this interesting insight that the Greeks, they had this uncertainty. They didn't want to overlook any deities. Somehow they sensed that they weren't seeing the full picture. And so Paul takes advantage of that opening, that opportunity, that uncertainty to speak to that. Now, of course, later when he writes his letter to the Romans in Romans 1:19 through 20, he expounds upon this idea further by asserting that every person possesses an innate awareness of the one true God. Take a look, Romans 1:19 through 20. He says, "For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse." Now, that conviction, that understanding of the knowledge of God is what enables Paul to speak with confidence before these men of Athens. And you and I can have that same confidence as we speak with people today. That they have this awareness of God. They may deny it, they may explain it away in all sorts of terms, maybe emotional, personal, psychological, scientific. But even the most avowed atheists, sometimes it's ironic that they'll blame God when something bad happens. How could God allow that, right? Well, I thought you didn't believe in God. In desperate times, even irreligious people will welcome your prayers. Now, we don't see altars to unknown gods for our town, but if we're observant, if we're looking, we'll notice those openings, those opportunities. The question is, are we paying attention? Are we looking for them?